Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today's a Q&A episode. I have some topics that I want to go over, mostly around muscle building and training for muscle growth. But first, before I do that, just want to go over my free body recomp checklist. So I go over what is how to do it, two types of body recomp, the importance of focusing on body composition over scale weight, and then 10 things you need to do to help yourself achieve that body recomp, getting more muscle, less body fat. So if you want to check that out, the link to that is in the show notes. So with that out of the way, let's dive into today's topics or questions. So the first question is good lean body mass. What's a good high range natural upper level for a 5'7" female? As I'm going to say with most of this, it's hard to give an exact number here, right? And then obviously what is good high range natural upper level. Now, obviously having your height is definitely going to be helpful here because we can take some information from that to give you a good idea of maybe what would be a good number for you to aim for. First, I think it's important to go over what is your goal? What are you trying to get? Is it just to know? Okay, then that's fine. That's a different conversation. But I think depending on what your goal is going to be important here. Is it for just health purposes? Is it just for just regular function? Is it to have as much muscle as possible? Is it aesthetic? Obviously, as we climb up this ladder to max muscle aesthetic purposes, you do have to really go out of your way to continue to build more muscle there. Once you get past this point of the initial little bit of things that you do from a day-to-day standpoint, those kind of newbie gains, once you get from there, it gets challenging to continue to build more and more muscle. And we just have to understand, okay, what am I trying to get out of this? Is it, I do just want to have as much to, right? Or is it just for health and function? Because when somebody asks good lean body mass, again, it really does depend on what you're trying to get out of it, because you need a lot less for health and function than you would if it was more for aesthetic purposes. And I think it's important to know why you're doing that, because that's going to guide your decisions and it's going to help you realize, like, figure out if it's worth it to continue to pursue building more and more, which I think at the end of the day, we still need to do everything we need to put ourselves in a position to add more muscle, because it does become very tough to gain more as you get more advanced in training. And so again, it is tough to get an exact number here, but as I said, with you giving 5'7" as a female, like, that does help. I think having height is super important. So one thing we could look at is FFMI. So basically this is the fat-free body mass index, in which you can calculate the amount of muscle mass relative to height, and it's an alternative to body mass index. And so, again, you do need your body fat percentage because you need to get your total weight and then your lean weight, and then there's a calculation that goes into this. And when we look at this, below average would be a number around 16 to 18. Average would be 19 to 20. Above average would be like 20 to 22. Excellent would be anywhere from like 22 to 24. Superior would be like 25, 26. Suspicious would be 26 to 28 or more. And again, once we get past that, you're likely going to get to the point to where you're looking at people who are taking PE. And then we have that suspicious group, superior. Those are probably people that have the genetics. They're very good at what they do. They train very hard. They've been super consistent. They've been doing it for years. That's the people you're going to likely find there at that point. But again, I think if you can get above 20, 21, 22, let's say you get to 20, you're likely good from a function and health standpoint. And past that, now we're looking at more aesthetics and max muscle building there. And so again, like I said, you do need your body fat percentage. And so one thing I would say for people is always give yourself a little bit more body fat than you think. So if you think you're 10% as a male, give yourself anywhere from 10 to 15%. If you think you're 20% as a female, give yourself anywhere from 20 to 24% and kind of play around with it there. Just because, again, for one, there's not going to be anything that's going to be super accurate from a body fat percentage calculation. And we tend to underestimate the amount of body fat that we have and the body fat percentage that we are. I've been there. Like, I've thought I was definitely like close to 5% for my shows. And there's no way. I was probably closer to 8, 9% there, even though I felt super lean. So just understand that we're likely off on that and think we have less body fat than we do there. So we want to look at FFMI. That's a great thing to look at, because again, if let's take the 5'7" female here, and we make sure I have this right. I don't think it asks for man versus woman. So if we put this in 5'7", 160 pounds, 20% body fat, you're looking at 20 to 21 there for your FFMI. Now, if you're down to 125 pounds at 20% body fat, now you're at 16, right? So again, you could see where it's going to take your lean body mass, and it's going to take all of that into consideration. Now, you take someone who's 5'7", they're 200 pounds at 10% body fat. Now they're at unlikely. That would be insane. So you can see how it scales to that. So I think that can be super helpful to give you an idea of where you're at. And again, if you fall above 20, you're likely in a good spot. And then I think anything past 20 or higher, there is going to be a time commitment to it. And you just need to, we'll talk about some things that are going to put you in a better position to add more muscle. But from a time perspective, I definitely think that you need to consider that. I also, again, we could look at BMI plus body fat percentage. So again, we know when it comes to BMI that it's not necessarily the greatest marker, but it can be helpful. I think if you get to the point where you're obese or higher, you're likely at too high of a body weight. Even if you have a lot of muscle or a decent amount of muscle, from an overall health perspective, we would probably be better to drop you down a bit. And then if you're too low, same thing, right? This isn't necessarily going to be great either. You're likely not going to be in a good spot. Like you might have some muscle, but again, muscle is going to play into your scale weight. So if it's too low, then again, from a lean body mass perspective, we know that, hey, whatever you have at that range is likely not going to be enough. You likely would benefit from doing more. And it would be tougher to build muscle here. And I think more so due to what habits, lifestyle got you to that BMI in the first place. That to me, that would be the big thing that we would want to look at is, okay, the lifestyle habits and everything that got you to that point are going to be a big player here, and why it would be tough to you're likely not going to have as much muscle as you wouldn't be at that good range for lean body mass. So looking at BMI and then body fat percentage. So I think if we can take BMI and you're in that normal to low overweight range, I think you're at a good starting point. From there, looking at body fat percentages. So now it comes down to, okay, for men, are you somewhere between, let's say, 10 and 18% body fat, maybe 10 to 20? For women, are you anywhere between 18 and 30%? So I think if you have a solid BMI and you're in those ranges, you're likely have really maxed out like the health and function side of things in terms of muscle. Because again, we know BMI is going to take into consideration your weight. If we're too low, likely not great for building muscle. Too high, again, you're from an overall health perspective, that's not going to be great. And you're likely going to have, even if you do have a lot of muscle, you're likely having a little bit too high body fat percentage as well too there. So I think even if we have a good amount of lean body mass, but our BMI is too high, we're likely not from an overall health perspective, we're likely going to be hurting our overall health long term at that point. Again, most people don't have to worry about that, but that's why I think it's important to consider your BMI and your body fat percentage, not just one or the other there. So I think if you take these three markers, so look at your FFMI, but also take your body mass index and your body fat percentage. And again, you're in a range where your BMI is somewhere between normal to slightly overweight. Body fat percentage is in that range. Maybe you're on the lower end of those numbers I gave. And then you plug in your FFMI. And again, you're likely at that point going to be somewhere above 20. Like you're at a good lean body mass range. Now, again, if we want to go to the higher range, then we would obviously need to continue to push from there. So what I will say on this is there's going to be a few things. So a low body fat percentage. So for this person specifically, they told me they were around 16, 17, 18% body fats, 5'7" as a female. So basically with this, and they gave me a little bit of background on like kind of what they do from a training perspective. So I would say though that the lower body fat percentage basically means you need to nail everything to a T, especially the higher your FFMI is. So the higher your FFMI is and the leaner you are, the more you're going to need to nail everything to continue to add more muscle at that point, right? So if you're at, let's say, 16% body fat, and again, go back to what I said about taking body fat percentage. If you think you're at 16%, I would take it anywhere from 16 to 20% because that's likely where you are, maybe even a bit higher. So 16 to 22%, see where your FFMI is. But look, if you truly are sub 20% body fat as a woman, sub 10% as a male, you're likely going to need to push a surplus at some point to continue gaining more muscle, right? And this is the nuance people miss with like calorie deficits and calories amounts for building muscle is we got to take into consideration your body fat percentage, but then also, like we said here, your FFMI can be super helpful. If you're higher FFMI and a leaner body fat percentage, one, if you do want to build muscle, like you're going to have to nail everything to a T. And I'm talking your training, your recovery, your nutrition, like everything's going to need to be pretty much up there in terms of what you're doing. And even then, I would imagine you're not going to be able to build as much muscle. And so in this situation, you would likely need to be in a surplus to build muscle. Now, if you take someone who is for women, they're at 25% body fat, their FFMI is at 20. I think they have some wiggle room to where they don't necessarily need to push a calorie surplus to build more muscle. And so for men, if we're looking at men, you're at a FFMI of above 20 and you're sub 12% body fat, you're likely going to need to gain some body fat in order to continue building more muscle there. But if you're also, this person too is also doing like higher training volumes because they teach classes and stuff like that. So with that, like if you're doing these higher volumes, like then in higher training volumes, and that is going to warrant a surplus even more in this situation. Even if you nail everything else to a T, like I talked about, and you're at this leaner body fat percentage and a higher FFMI, your muscle growth is going to still likely be limited at that body fat percentage. So we need to build a bit more. We need to push a small calorie surplus in order to continue to gain more with that. Plus, as we age, building muscle gets tougher. And so the right conditions plus training are going to be even more important. So what would be the right conditions there? It's going to be, depending on your body fat percentage, a small calorie surplus, enough protein, meal timing would need to be nailed down, sleep would need to be in check. We would need to get overall stress level on the body in check. Like I said, from a nutrition, even like making sure you're eating enough carbohydrates. And then training, we need to make sure that we're providing the right stimulus. Like it becomes even more important to provide the right stimulus, and just random training and whatnot is not going to get it done. So we need to make sure that is on check. So the right conditions plus training are going to be even more important as we get older and older, because building muscle unfortunately does get tougher as we age. But in general, it is very tough to build like max amount of muscle anyways. There's likely a genetic ceiling without PED. So my thought on all this is put yourself in the right conditions to build muscle and stay consistent versus worrying about what that kind of number is, right? Like by taking your FFMI and your body fat percentage and your BMI, you should have a good idea of where you're at. And if you fall within that, you have an idea of, okay, what is good for my height and given my body fat percentage. So if it's not at good, which I would say good would be above average. If it's not there, then we know we have some wiggle room here to go. If you want high range, then obviously you now know, I would say that would be somewhere probably in the excellent range category, maybe there. And then max muscle would be like the suspicious. So we're talking 26 plus there. I think if you can get yourself to 24, 25 FFMI, you're going to have more muscle than you could ever imagine, but you also were really going to have to put more time into it, right? I think that's the big thing here is to scale up and up. It's going to require the right conditions and time. Like those are going to be the huge, and you just have to determine if that's the right thing for you. So the conditions and the training and everything like that becomes more and more important. But I think either way, no matter what, we need to make sure that I feel like at all times we want to work, we want to do our best to put ourselves in the best condition, like the best, set ourselves up for the best conditions to build muscle. No matter where we're at, I think it's always a good idea to get yourself pushed over to that standpoint. And again, it's going to depend on your current FFMI, your body fat percentage, and everything like that. And then really at the end of the day, you can let time and your genetic ceiling end up being the limiting factor there, and other bottlenecks in terms of, like I said, time, recovery, what you can do from a nutrition perspective. Those end up really being the things that kind of hurt people the most and cause them to never really reach their true genetic potential. So take me, for example, like I want to continue to build as much muscle as possible. And I by no means think I'm anywhere near, I feel like I could still add a lot of muscle, but things that I'm just running into things in terms of like lifestyle perspective, right? I want to also build my cardiovascular fitness. That's going to, at the end of the day, it's not going to cause me to not build muscle. It may be helping in some point, or in some form or fashion. But at the end of the day, you're likely not going to be able to have the max amount of cardiovascular fitness and the max amount of muscle. So you're already taking a small ding off of that FFMI potentially. And then I have other things. I'm not just a bodybuilder. It's not the only thing I do. So it's like from a time perspective, that goes down. My recovery could probably be a bit better than what it is. My nutrition could probably be a bit better than what it is. And so it's like I'm maximizing what I can do within my given constraints and always trying to improve my training and provide the right stimulus. But eventually at some point, that becomes the limiting factor there. And then genetics too, right? As I said, genetics are going to be a big thing where people are capped out by that. We don't want to use that as an excuse. We always want to keep pushing, but genetics are really a thing there. So I hope this gives you more insight into what would be a good lean body mass. And I think really at the end of the day, looking at your FFMI and comparing that with you're also looking at your BMI and your body fat percentage, and that's really going to tell you where you're at. So I had a client that asked about, is it bad to lift 2 days in a row when doing full body? So we'll take this across many different things, right? But I think with the context of doing full body workouts, so having her do 3 full body workouts, and she has to do 2 days in a row there. And so I think, again, to start with this, it does depend. This isn't a black or white. Yes, that is bad. It's not. It's bad, or no, it's not bad. It's fine. You can do whatever. I do think it depends. Okay. So I think a few things that we're going to look at is, one, how often it happens. Well, if it happens all the time, then I may want to look at switching up your split that you're doing if you had to go back to back all the time. Now, if it happens every once in a while and you have to go back to back on full body, I'm not overly concerned about that, because there's some things that we can work on, and I'll dive into what that is there. But again, I think we first need to look at the frequency of how often it happens. If it's happening all the time, then I may change your split to, like I said, maybe a upper, lower, and then a full. So in that way you can go back to back and there's not going to be much overlap, because really the downside with full body and going back to back is you are going to be doing every muscle group, not every muscle group, but at least most of your body, right? I think full body can be most of your body. It doesn't necessarily have to be every single muscle group. And then you go back again and you go back to back. But I also think it depends on what muscle groups are sore to, right? If you don't have any soreness in like your upper body and then you go and train the next day, maybe you can go and push that a bit more. Maybe your quads are sore. All right, if you have a quad exercise that next day, maybe you just back off a little bit on that one. You go more just to like get it in that day. And then people just lump legs together, but it's maybe for hamstrings the day before, you didn't really do anything that was super damaging. You're not super sore there, but then you have RDL the next day. It's okay. Now you can maybe push your RDL, right? So I think looking at what that overlap is, and then exercise order and what you're prioritizing. Your program's intelligently programmed. You're not going to be doing quads first every single day. Unless it's a focus for you, then that could potentially be a thing that you're looking at doing. But let's say it's a balanced program. You're probably going to be doing your upper body first one day, some more upper body stuff that day, and then the next day more lower body. So again, maybe the things that you did on the lower body, they didn't provide a huge stimulus. So then you can go and train them pretty hard the next day, and then you can back off maybe your upper body, right? But then also, so taking that into consideration, like what muscle groups are sore. But I do think an intelligent full body program will minimize soreness. And again, not everything is going to be equally sore. But like, for example, I would say one day you're going to do more of an isolation exercise, and then maybe the next day would be more compound. So again, you could likely go back to back on that. Do I think that in that second day you might see some performance decrements? Potentially. It depends on what you do. If you have to work out at night and then you have to work out in the morning the next day, well, definitely refueling and staying hydrated, getting a good night's sleep is going to be super helpful. But if you have 24 hours in between, you make sure you eat some food in between, you stay hydrated, get a good night's sleep. I think that's going to help widen that gap a little bit there. So I think training back-to-back days is not the worst thing in the world, especially when we talk full body. Obviously, if you're doing different muscle groups, then it's totally fine. But if it is, again, like full body like that, I think it's how often it happens. But if it keeps happening often, then we would need to change splits. Also, just understand that different muscle groups can get sore. So you're able to push certain muscle groups one day and then maybe not the next day. So that's a way to go about it. And I do think an intelligently designed full body program will minimize soreness to where, one, you're not going to see a ton of soreness in general. And so one day where you have to go back to back, likely not going to decrease your performance by a ton. But again, one day you may have more compound type movements for a certain muscle group, and then the next day it's less compound type movements. Again, not always going to work that way, but that could be the case. Hopefully that answered your questions there on if it's bad to lift 2 days in a row. As always, there's some context to it for sure. All right. Another person reached out about they're doing some box squats and they want to lower their depth, but they feel super unstable going a bit lower. So they asked if they needed to treat that as like a new exercise. And yeah, I think anytime we have to increase range of motion, especially when we're talking about it being in a part of a lift where it's most challenging, you are likely going to have to decrease weight to increase that range of motion. So in a squat, what is going to typically be tougher at the bottom, right? That's a more lengthened position. It's going to be a bit tougher there. It's just going to feel harder at the bottom than it would be at the top. In order to get more, you're likely going to have to decrease that range of motion and treat it like a new exercise and like new progressions at that point. Because when we look at the research on range of motion, the range of motion that you train in is what's going to get strong. So if you are neglecting a range of motion, you may not be as strong in that range of motion yet. And so you do need to treat it like a different exercise at that point. But as I said, where it's toughest at in the lift is going to be super important. If it was like, hey, you're not coming all the way up on your squats, you likely wouldn't need to decrease weight to get up for any further, right? You could keep weight the same and just increase your range of motion there. So let's take like a bench press or any sort of pressing movement where it's toughest at the bottom. If you're using like dumbbells or a barbell, same thing there. If you're going to increase that range of motion, you likely need to decrease weight because that's going to be the toughest part of the lift there. But if it's just like, hey, you just need to come out and lock out more, you likely don't need to decrease weight there. So just understand that even small amounts of range of motion, especially when it's in that challenging position like that, makes a big difference. So I think even just a little bit of weight is a little bit of range of motion increase is really going to drastically alter how you do that lift. So definitely would be one where I would decrease weight and kind of start fresh with it and build up from there with that. So hopefully that was helpful. That's it for today's podcast. If you found this podcast be helpful in any way, if you could leave a rating and review, and that will help more people find it. And then if you haven't yet, give me a follow on Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. That's where I'm most active on social media. If you have any questions on this, anything I went over today, let me know. And that's it for this episode. I'll talk to you guys soon.